I called Bill Burns, who's the director of the CIA. What's the best way of dealing with Putin? Because I don't want to make a mistake. They said, treat him with respect. Don't treat him as the bad boy because you won't get anything. And I just saved my own dignity by speaking to him in German to remind him that he was a secret agent for the KGB in Dresden.
How many people have interviewed Vladimir Putin, Barack Obama and Angela Merkel? Lionel Barber was at the top of journalism for 2 decades. When he became editor of the FT in 2005, the digital media revolution was just starting.
I remember going to see Rupert Murdoch in 2003.
Facebook was still called the Facebook, and Twitter hadn't even been invented. His almost 20-year editorship of the FT has made him one of the most respected people in the world.
I'm sorry, but I've got a meeting with the Prime Minister.
What was he going to do when he stood down?
You're coming into the final 10 years of your career.
What? I thought I was going another 20 years.
Well, you may well do.
He dedicated 3 years of focus on one person.
He was the richest man in the world for 3 days.
On one story.
With the money trail, there would be stories, and it was just a question of getting them to cooperate.
Masayoshi Son, the founder of SoftBank.
I float my company on the stock exchange. What did you buy? Well, I bought some golf clubs. Well, yes, but you also invested in a ridiculous house, people refer to as Wayne Manor.
Today, we talk to him about what it's like to interview powerful people.
The stories I've heard about Donald Trump, the microphone's going to go up in smoke.
And how to prepare.
Those who don't take the risk don't get to drink the champagne. And at that point, I thought, he's going to do something.
How he gets in the room when no one else can.
We stood up against everybody on that. The financial establishment, the regulators, the politicians, the lawyers in the City of London.
And why journalism is about to change in a big way.
Now we are going to come into agreement here because I think that's right. I just wanted to embarrass you, put you on the spot there.
Lionel, out of all the politicians, all the world leaders, all the business leaders that you've met, you picked to write a book on Mayor Son. Why was that?
Masayoshi Son, because of money. And because I wanted a real challenge after leaving the FT. Always been interested in biography. And the attraction about Masayoshi Son is there's no Western biography of him. He was the richest man in the world for 3 days at the height of the dot-com bubble. But he was also at the intersection of politics, technology, finance, financial engineering. And then there's the backstory of him being Korean in Japan. So all those things put together meant that I knew that with the money trail, there would be stories, and it was just a question of getting them to cooperate.
What were your first impressions of him when you met him as editor of the FT?
Well, he was very good at saying he was going to do something like lunch with the FT, but then he didn't do lunch with the FT, even though I shook hands and got somebody to take a photograph with me, Masayoshi Son, and Larry Page, who was running Google at the time. And, and then the second time I met him was when he organised this smash and grab bid to buy one of Britain's top technology companies, and I think you may well have been in government at the time, which was called Arm Holdings. And a fantastic British success story. Grew out of Acorn Computer back in the late 70s. And this is, one of the most advanced semiconductor chip design companies in the world, supplying 5% of iPhones, and he got it for 32 billion, and he came to the FT, and he started talking about something called the Internet of Things. You ever heard about that now? That went south. And I thought, well, again, he's a bit weird. I'm sort of curious about this guy. So I made a mental note and thought sometime maybe I might spend more time with him.
And his big idea is the singularity. Can you explain to us what he means by the singularity?
Well, in a sentence, it's when robots become more intelligent than human beings. Human beings have got trillions of, in effect, transistors in the brain. But with this, they become sentient. Now, he's been talking about that for at least 20 years. It's one of his signature tunes. I mean, we're not there yet, but people are talking about that a bit more. I think the broader point is that Masayoshi Son has ridden the technological wave right from the 1980s, when microprocessors really started changing, and then you go to the internet, and then you go to social media, and he's been involved in all these various stages, the mobile internet, and the latest is, of course, artificial intelligence, and that's where he thinks he can bring about his next act.
And how do you think he sees the future of the next 10 years?
Oh, definitely. If not singularity, definitely a society where AI, or as he calls it, artificial general intelligence, or artificial superintelligence, is going to play a massive role. Now, it's all a bit nebulous. I remember sitting with him in the last interview I did in this incredible office, which sits by a table which is actually even longer than Vladimir Putin's table, as I wrote. And I'm sitting a long way away, and we're coming to the end of the interview. The sun's going down over Tokyo Bay, and I said to him, "Well, how will you be remembered?" Of course, he's only 67. And he's had many iterations through his corporate life, and we'll probably talk about that. But he said, "I want to be remembered just artificial general intelligence." But the irony is that he's missed that at the beginning. He didn't get into ChatGPT. He's had some fantastic investments. I mean, he invested in Alibaba before it was a household name. He got into Yahoo before it was a household name, and he made billions that way. But even though he's talked a lot about artificial intelligence, he didn't get into deep AI like Sam Altman's ChatGPT or Anthropic or these kind of companies. So he's slightly behind the curve on that.
How and why do you think he missed that? Because he must have been trying to get the meetings and make the investments.
I'm not sure. He did invest in about 2017 in the company which we now know because it's so valuable. It's the most valuable company in the world, called NVIDIA, which is essentially making computer graphics chips, but then had a step jump in quality to produce these extremely sophisticated advanced technology micro chips. And he had about 5% of that company, but he sold in 2019. So the company that is now worth more than $3 trillion, I did say that, $3 trillion, and he had 5% of it, and he sold. So he missed that meteor. And I think one of the reasons is he was just investing in so many other dozens and dozens of companies, from dog walking apps to, and he just missed. Yeah, well, he invested in Uber, yes. He invested in Lyft, even the competitor. I mean, the way to look at it, and I think this book is quite interesting, should be find investors in technology stocks, or investors in general, find it very interesting about how his approach. I mean, it's almost cover every square on the board. Yeah. I mean, you're going to make money somehow, aren't you?
And do you think, out of interest, slight sidetrack, that NVIDIA can maintain its momentum?
I do, but remember that, I mean, when you're talking about momentum, I mean, this is a company that's sort of tripled in value. I mean, more than that. I mean, if it was worth $1 trillion, but say it was worth 600 and it's now worth more than 3 trillion. It's just recently you've seen that if it doesn't have exponential growth in revenue, suddenly the stock's marked down 20%. And there's a lot of investors that I respect who never went near the stock and therefore missed it on the way up. And now they're really not sure whether to go in because it's more than 3 trillion. And it's definitely a bigger bet than, say, Microsoft, which has got an interest in ChatGPT, and the big data companies, Google, Meta, etc.
Because one of the memorable stories in the book is when he goes to see Steve Jobs and essentially takes sort of a prototype of an iPhone back in 2006, 2007, I think this
Yeah,
is.
it's 5 and 6. Yeah, 2005, 6. Yeah.
But can you kind of explain to us what he sort of
Well,
does?
this is very interesting because Masayoshi Son, who does like to tell a story, he says and insisted to me, and I questioned him about 5 or 6 times on this, because the relationship with Jobs is very important. I mean, in a sentence, the crucial thing is that he did actually get exclusive distribution for the iPhone in Japan, and that made his mobile phone company. I mean, he'd bought Vodafone Japan, and without the iPhone, that was a great deal for him. But the wrinkle here is that Masayoshi Son says he goes to Steve Jobs with the iPod, and says you could actually make this into something more. Now, it's maybe not quite the smartphone, but this concept of having a device which goes beyond just playing music in your ears. And he also claims that he designed the emoticons, etc. Now, there are other people who think that this is, I think the technical term is bullshit. But he insists he had regular conversations. He also says that when he produced the drawing in front of Steve Jobs looked at him and said, I'm not getting into, because he's very secretive, I don't know what this is, but I don't need your shitty drawing. I've got my own ideas. But Masa claims that more than 2 years before the launch of the iPhone, the ubiquitous, unbelievable consumer product, the iPhone, he got a verbal commitment to get exclusivity. I'm not sure that's right either. But I gave him the side of the story. He's a good storyteller.
Pulling it off. And he has quite a significant meeting, age 16, with the head of McDonald's. And I was fascinated by this story.
Den Fujita.
Yeah, can you tell us what happens?
So Den Fujita is the man who went to America. He had worked in MacArthur's, General MacArthur, who was the supreme commander in Asia and then became the kind of commandante in post-war Japan, and oversaw the drafting of a new constitution after that. I mean, Japan was obliterated during the Second World War, and Fujita was a translator. So he had connections in the American military, and he spoke English. He learned English. So he goes to McDonald's, and American says, well, I can, give me the franchise for Japan, and I'll sort of Japanize. I mean, don't ask me what Ronald McDonald is, but that was one of the characters. And he becomes Mr. Burger, hamburger in Japan, makes a fortune. And he wrote a book, a sort of self-help book, which was a big bestseller in post-war Japan. And Masa, who wanted to, was fascinated by America, crucially decided to go to America as a student to learn English because he wanted to be global. He was inspired by Fujita. So he wrote to him, he rang up on the sort of payphone, this is his story anyway, and he's badgering Fujita's secretary, and Fujita's very famous. Finally, he decides to get a plane. He's only age 16, and parlays his way into getting a 10-minute meeting with the great man, Mr. McDonald's in Japan. And Fujita says, learn English, go to America, and there we go.
And learn
Bingo.
computer science as well, is that?
Yeah, he talked about computers as well. I mean, again, I've gone with the story, but there's always, I've also gone into the backstory. I do not.
Okay.
This is a biography. There are some things that Masa will not like.
Yeah.
Plenty of embarrassing moments, because he's a human being. He's made big mistakes. But it's a biography. It's not a stenography. So when I did 4 interviews with Masa, I'm not sitting there writing down everything that he says and taking it as face value.
How do you prepare for meetings like that? Because like you say, he's quite a private sort of person. He believes that adds
Very
to the
private.
mystique and so on. So how do you prepare for interviews like that?
Well, the first thing to prepare for is to fly to Tokyo and then be told that the man's too busy to see you. I mean, that's pretty good. So you have to learn a bit of humility, understand that, with the Japanese, it's a longer waiting game. I mean, I do have some experience in Japan because Nikkei, the great publishing house, bought the Financial Times for $1.3 billion in 2015. And I made 14 trips to Japan after that to build a relationship with the Japanese. So I don't speak Japanese, but I've had serious exposure to the elite or to the Japanese business community. So you just have to.
Culturally, it is very different.
It's just massively, massively different. And the one thing you cannot do is, you can't complain. I just said, okay, a bit disappointed. And they said, what's the problem? The weather's quite nice here in Tokyo. It's October. So I said, well, I'm coming back. I will be back, like MacArthur said. And I'm going to Kyushu, to the Western Archipelago, and I'm going to visit all his schools. I'm going to see where he grew up, and then I'll come back. So actually, it was better in some ways. The preparation was more serious. That first interview, I'd not been to Kyushu. I'd not seen or read all the history around it. So I was better prepared. Now, for an interview like that, the most important thing when you're interviewing somebody is to be very clear about, if I got one interview, two interviews, I asked for 4. I was never given an absolute assurance. But so you don't want to unload at the first instance. You need to win confidence and trust. So that first interview was essentially to show him that I'd done my research and that I was serious.
And what did you learn from visiting his home? Because quite a big part of the story and his makeup is that he's an immigrant in Japan.
Well, his grandparents were immigrants, and his grandfather came to Japan from Korea in 1917. And it's very important to remember that Korea at that point was a colony of Japan. It was part of the Japanese Empire, Imperial Japan. And the Koreans came over in their thousands for jobs, often in the coal mines. They were not given full citizenship. They were subjects of a colonial empire. So these were second-class citizens. They were not given opportunities to work in ordinary companies. They couldn't even be school teachers, which was Masa's first ambition. So you could call Masayoshi Son the world's most renowned ethnically oppressed investor or Japanese businessman. And he's still viewed, because he's Korean, with great suspicion. He's a financial engineer. What does he make? Doesn't make cars, doesn't make steel. But the discrimination that he faced and his family faced, and they went, it's very important to see that they became farmers in the 30s, but then you had the war, and they went back to Japan. This is before Masa's born. And they were treated as outcasts by their own families and relatives in Korea in 1946-47. So they went back on a smuggler's boat back to Japan, where they faced even worse circumstances. They were in a slum, and his father was a bootlegger. Yeah. His father then went into pig breeding, and then what a lot of people did was go into pachinko, which is this pinball gambling. Oh, yeah. And if you haven't read Pachinko, which is the great novel about the Korean Japanese, it's a bestseller, Netflix. Somebody said it's the Brothers Karamazov of Korean literature. And it is a great read, and I actually quote from the book. But that story of gambling parlors, underworld, is very much part of the Masa story and where he comes from. And I saw that when I met his father at the family home in Tosu, which was in the main room, and it was like a shrine to his son.
Well, what was that meeting like, meeting his father?
Incredible. And I went with my interpreter, because I was supposed to go. Now, how many names am I allowed to drop on this? Okay. So I had been invited for the second meeting to go with Masa to meet him and his father at the opening of the baseball season, because Masayoshi Son, SoftBank, his company, owns the SoftBank Hawks, who play in Fukuoka in Western Japan in the Kyushu. But through a separate arrangement, because I'm on the board of a foreign policy think tank, we had a meeting with the Prime Minister, Kishida. So I was able to say to Masayoshi Son, well, I'm sorry, but I've got a meeting with the Prime Minister. I can't go to the opening of the baseball season. And then okay. And then I said, well, can I still see his father? So we went out very early in the morning to the home, and we were greeted. He had this woman sort of, not sure what the arrangement was there, but he didn't speak any English. And gradually he sort of told the story of his revered son and how proud he was and what he'd done. But then I also asked him about what it was like growing up in post-war Japan after the war, and I got some great stories and colour about that.
And because he's told from a very early age by his father that, you are, bear in mind they're not in Tokyo, etc., but he's told that, you can have a great impact on the world, like from a very early age, consistently. So you've met so many kind of global leaders and so on. What keeps people like that sort of driven for so long? Like I find it fascinating. We asked Nick Clegg this about Mark Zuckerberg. Like, they've made so much money. Like, money's just a number to them. Like, what keeps these people driven, do you think?
This was one of the most important questions I felt I had to answer in the biography, and I think it's several factors at once. The first is that true entrepreneurs they love taking risk. I mean, that's the essence of entrepreneurialism. And they're also capable of wanting to constantly reinvent themselves. Now, with Masayoshi Son, it's taken several iterations from being a software distributor in 1981. He couldn't even get a bank loan, by the way, because he was Korean. He had a mentor who helped him on that loan. Then he goes into because the Japanese economy implodes with the stock market, with the real estate bubble, and he gets into investing in America, low interest rates, can borrow easily, gets into the internet, then he goes into mobile, and then he goes into global investing after, So that's the first thing. He's constantly looking to reinvent himself. But he also wants to prove himself because he's an outsider. And he's Korean. He almost wants to be more Japanese than the Japanese. So during the earthquake, the terrible earthquake in Fukushima, he's suddenly talking about, moving thousands of people and, leaving SoftBank and being a great patriot. He invokes Japanese historical figures. So that sense of being on the outside but wanting to be accepted and wanting status is very important. And I think the third point is he does care about money, although his official public profile is very modest. I float my company on the stock exchange. What did you buy? Well, I bought some golf clubs. Well, yes, but you also invested in a ridiculous house with 3 houses together, which is, people refer to as Wayne Manor, like the Batman's place. He's got an artificial base golf club in the basement. He's got a giant place outside Tokyo. He's got a huge place in California. I mean, this is a man, he drinks the best wine, Romani Conti La Tâche. It's about $6,000 to $10,000 a bottle. He always puts that out. He gets the best sushi from the Tokyo fish market. Some people say that full fish costs $35,000. I mean, and an American who talked to the chef and said, what do you do with the rest of it? Because the chef has to go out and buy it at 4 o'clock in the morning. He said, well, there are some benefits of being the chef, Obviously sells it to the other restaurants. But I mean, money does matter to Masa, but I think the status is more important. He also wants to be number one.
Yeah.
I mean, he thinks big. He really wants to be number one, not just number one wealthiest in Japan. And then the last point for him, but I don't know whether this applies to Mark Zuckerberg. I'm giving you a long answer here, but it's a very important question, is that, and I mean, I spoke to one of the top Wall Street people who's a billionaire himself, and I asked him about Masa, and he says he's an incredible entrepreneur, but he's also a gambling addict. I mean, he's addicted to gambling. I mean, it's like he's in a perpetual casino.
Do you think that's true of a lot of top sort of finance chiefs that you've interacted with over the years?
I haven't met anybody like Masa who takes the insane risks that he does. I mean, it really is insane, where he'll bet the house.
Yeah.
And he, one way of looking at it is, if you come from nothing, if you lose everything, well, you're back where you were. I mean, he's never been quite wiped out, but I think you can talk about 3 to 4 times when he went and almost crashed, almost totally imploded.
I wanted to let you know that last week we launched Boxlight, a creative studio to tell the stories of British business. I believe that lots of companies are going to build their own media and content arms. We're taking all the lessons that we have learned from creating Jimmy's Jobs of the Future over the last 4 years and helping businesses create their own insightful content. Whether it's going to be attracting potential employees, drive sales, or even persuade government, I believe this will be the new form of communication. I think there's a growing appetite for long-form content. If you want to get in touch with the team to see how we can work with you, check out our website at boxlight.io. That's boxlight.io. Back to the show.
I have a theory actually on British entrepreneurs that they either come, the really successful ones either come from the working classes because they've got nothing to lose and it's kind of necessity, or the other is the sort of like the upper classes, and actually you don't get middle class entrepreneurs. That's my sort of theory, having interviewed a few.
I need to think about that one. But you do need to have that desperate sense of wanting to prove yourself and prove your product, your idea will work, and be absolutely committed to it. And he really has, and again, insane levels of self-confidence. Somebody described this as, because I was, again, trying to understand the way he thinks. And somebody said, this is somebody who worked at the Vision Fund, that Masa, he's like Ronald Reagan with Star Wars. And the experts would come and say to Ronald Reagan, the President Reagan, this will not work. But Reagan was so convinced that he saw it, he had this vision of a space-based shield against Russian nuclear weapons. He wanted to rid the world of nuclear weapons. So he thought, he saw it, he believed it, and therefore it must be true. And that's a bit like Masa.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I wanted to talk a bit more broadly about kind of wealth creation and so on, because you say in your other book, which
The Powerful and the Damned.
Powerful and the Damned. Well, why did you call it The Powerful and the Damned?
Well, I didn't. I thought it was a rather pretentious title, actually. But my publisher, I had a much better title. Do you know what it was? Because these were my private diaries as the editor of the Financial Times. And I wanted the title, This Conversation Never Happened. And they thought it was too facetious.
Well, I think that's quite...
They wanted something that would be, it's I don't want to criticize my publisher because they've been very good to me. They gave me a nice advance. And I had a great editor, Stuart Profit, for this book on the Masa biography. Yeah. But anyway.
But I've found it fascinating reading it, and it's like 20 years of high politics, business and finance interlocking with so many kind of key events. You talk about in it the Financial Times sort of standing up for capitalism and wealth creation, and we can link this with Masa as well, but it's like, how do you define wealth creation?
Well, I'm not too high-minded about it. I mean, first of all, it is making an investment. Could be your money, you could have borrowed money. We could talk a bit about how Masa, borrowing is a big deal for him, and he then borrows on top of the borrowing, the so-called leverage. But to answer your question, it is investing and then making a return and building a fortune and building an enterprise. And then as a result of that, still you employ people. Yeah. And you also contribute to the community, the prosperity of the community. So I think wealth creation is not just about numbers. It is about, and I'm going to be very candid here. I mean, I think some of our middle class colleagues don't understand that if you're trying to create wealth, you will fail sometimes. Yeah. And that's an essential part of being an entrepreneur, is to take the risk. Now there's bad risk taking and good risk taking, but risk taking is essential part of wealth creation.
Because I thought it was very interesting in the election campaign, Keir Starmer saying that he stood up, his number one priority was going to be wealth creation, he said. And I thought that was an interesting tonal shift. But I'm not sure I know what Keir Starmer means by wealth creation. I think he's probably got a bit of a different definition of it than perhaps we do, etc. So,
what do you think it is then?
Well, I don't know at the moment. I personally, I don't think the Labour front bench, I don't want to attack them too much, because I think they're putting a lot of time into the business, but they didn't really have any wealth creators there. And I think that's a problem. If you have got to intrinsically understand it. And I don't think there's anyone really around him that does. No,
it's a problem with politicians that they have come up through, the research departments or being political advisors. I think there are far too many of them, by the way. And they know nothing about wealth creation.
I'm trying to do it now.
Yeah, no, I'm just wanting to embarrass you, put you on the spot there. But no, the key point here is that, this is not a bureaucratic exercise. And also politicians are not sufficiently sensitive to the perverse consequences of certain actions. So, for example, and I certainly personally, it was after I left the FT, but we were no friends at the FT of not particularly Theresa May's government, certainly not Boris Johnson's government, and we opposed Brexit and everything else. But it is really important to understand that foreign investors are looking at this government and what they're doing in terms, if they start changing the capital gains tax rates and doing things which are going to deter the risk-taking and investment that I'm talking about, then we have a problem. And I think that it was very necessary to have a change in government because we'd had 14 years of Conservative Party, and the last 5 years were, apart from Jeremy Hunt, I think, and mostly Rishi Sunak on the economic policy was actually sensible. Truss was bongers. But you've got to be very careful now. In 1979, Margaret Thatcher's government, one of the first decisions they made was to scrap foreign exchange controls. That was a massive signal to foreign investors around the world. Similarly, Blair Brown in 1997, they made the Bank of England free, and that was also a big signal to foreign investors. If the first signal in the budget is just, well, we're going to just clamp down taxes, they've already inherited and taken on by the way, it's a conservative position too on non-doms. All these signals. When I travel around the world, and I did a lot of traveling for this book, I think I made 6 trips to Japan, and I did probably 8 to 10 California, Silicon Valley, and I think I did 7 trips to America last year, Washington, New York, Colorado, Arizona. I mean, people are constantly asking questions. What's Starmer's government like? I don't think there's quite enough kind of feel for. It's not just the British audience here; it's the foreign investing audience.
And what would your piece of advice be to Rachel Reeves and Starmer ahead of the budget to attract investment? Like, what could be the thing they could do?
Well,
they provided stability.
Don't tinker too much. I mean, be very, very careful about raising tax rates. I mean, if you're going to do capital gains tax, I mean, sorry, I think it's a big mistake. That's part of the investing. You want to encourage people to take risks, to build wealth. So I wouldn't be touching that. I mean, look, I'm not the Chancellor of the Exchequer. They can do what they like, but they need to be very careful about how this is viewed. And again, I'm lucky enough to meet people who are in London who are foreign born, but they've come to London because they think it's an exciting place to live. But if it looks as though the government is taking a punitive attitude, then people are going to leave.
Which political leader, over the course of your career, time as editor, do you think has understood business and wealth creation the best?
I think Margaret Thatcher definitely had a good sign. But remember, she brought in some important business people into Downing Street, notably David Young, who was involved in the privatization, British Telecom, etc. And some of the cabinet, I mean, they went walkabout a bit. Cecil Parkinson, they'd had experience in the private sector. So I would certainly give them, that government, successive governments, quite a lot of credit. I think Tony Blair had a pretty good idea too. And obviously, after the Prime Minister, 10 years of Prime Minister, he certainly got involved in the private sector. I think he has a very good feel now because he's had so much more exposure. He'd be a good Prime Minister now, my goodness.
Do you think? What do you think about Donald Trump? Do you think? I mean, he's probably the biggest business leader that's ever held political.
Yeah, but he inherited wealth. He's a trust fund baby. Yeah. I mean, I've just written a review for the Financial Times on the big book by the two New York Times Pulitzer Prize winning journalists who looked at his tax affairs. They finally handed over his records. I mean, the guy paid next to no tax. He gamed the system. I mean, how many successful properties deals has he done? Maybe 1.5.
Yeah.
He's gamed the system on tax. His father gave him all the money. I mean, he's not a great American success story. He's good at bullying bankers, and he's certainly good at not paying. I mean, the stories I've heard about Donald Trump, I mean, the microphone's going to go up in smoke. There's a hilarious story about a restaurateur. I was actually on a holiday recently with him, and I won't name him, but he wanted to open his restaurant in one of Trump's buildings. Trump said, "Well, why don't we throw a party?" And Trump didn't pay. So he said, "Look, I've had all these guests. Here's the bill. It's $120,000 or something." He didn't pay. He just stiffed him. That's Trump.
That's extraordinary.
So don't tell me start citing Trump as the great private sector guy. He knows how to bully people. He knows how to play the banks, stare them down, game of chicken, all this stuff.
He
also understands brands.
Yeah,
that is true. The reality TV show is where he made all the money. Based on Trump putting brands on the show. On The Apprentice. So I'll give him that. Anyway, carry on.
Well, I'm also interested in one of the reasons why I think he's done partly well in business, or perceived to have done well, is he himself as a brand. And one of the things I think is a shame about business over the last 10, 15 years is there's been a bit of a reduction of personalities in it. Is that something that you would sort of agree with potentially, or what are your reflections on that? PR and comms has become such a big industry now that they've almost sort of chiseled business leaders to the point of where there is so little personality, I find.
Now we are going to come into agreement here, because I think that's right. I mean, that people are so afraid in the modern age, social media, etc. The looking to be a crackpot, or it's not the smooth image, and you've got to kind of they put political leaders as well, but business leaders in a cocoon. And it is a shame because you miss that rawness. Now, I think there still are some brands. I mean, if you think about it, I see the Pimlico Plumber. He had a pretty good brand, but he's leaving. But
there aren't many others. I mean, it's because I was thinking your book's interesting on so many levels. Business biographies, sort of catnip to me. But I was thinking, who would you write a British business biography of? Who sort of intrigues you on that? Demis Hassabis, maybe?
No, because it's too early. Mm-hmm. I mean, Demis Hassabis is an extraordinary scientific brain at the forefront of the AI revolution. I wouldn't, we followed this at the Financial Times. I mean, in a way, the rise and fall of Sir Martin Sorrell, but how interesting is he? Fairly interesting, but by comparison, for example, to Klaus Schwab, who created Davos, maybe not so much. Sorrell. But Sorrell had his own brand. I mean, he had suffered from founder syndrome at the same time. No, I think I'd have to give that a little bit more thought about who are the...
Because I find it interesting, because two of the sort of, it's boomers, right, in Branson and Sugar are the two most known. And then it almost skips then a generation to the likes of Stephen Bartlett, Ben Francis now. Like, there's a kind of weird sort of gap between 30 and 60-year-olds of where there aren't the sort of personalities of British business just aren't there in the same way. I mean, there's Digby Jones.
Oh, my God. Please. I mean,
but
he's just a blowhard.
Well, yeah, but I am also interested in your views on how business, the CBI have had, troubles over the last couple of years, like how business makes their case in the modern world. I'd be interested in.
Well, they can't be just bleaters complaining. They need to do. And the CBI, has always had a slightly problematic relationship with the government. I mean, they're the big business. In a way, what interests me much more, are the smaller companies that are growing quite quickly, but they're, it's not just startups, but sort of companies that have developed. They're not bureaucratic organizations. They're much more nimble, and I think, I need to do some work to give you a full list, but I think there's quite a lot of going under the surface in Britain, and we don't hear a lot about them, and not least because the business press doesn't spend a lot of time trying to find them out.
No, and they're busy doing their own thing, I find. So I found this in government, is that sometimes they wouldn't be looking to engage with government particularly. Are there any names that you would particularly mention, just thinking about our future guest list?
Yeah, well, again, if you'd asked me before...
oh, sorry, I've put you on the spot.
I mean...
Maybe we'll come back to it.
You need to give me a bit of time to kind of come up with a...
Oh, yeah. We'll edit that. Maybe we'll do it.
If you stop later, I'll give it some 2 minutes thought to give some names, yeah.
If you were starting out in journalism now, what beat would you want to cover? What's most interesting?
Well, I would be the technology correspondent, because then I'd be able to get my finger in all sorts of pies.
The FT now has an AI.
They do, and she's wonderful. Madhumita Murgia has written a very good book. She's an outstanding journalist, very, very smart, and writes beautifully, clearly, and they've built up even more technology coverage since I left. But I wouldn't be and I refused to be a Westminster correspondent in the 80s because I didn't want to be part of that bubble. But I would be business focused.
Yeah.
I would go into I would write about private markets, not banks, because I think do you know what I'd like to be? I'd like to be the family office correspondent. I'd like to look at all that private wealth and where it's going, because that's a huge phenomenon that's happened in the last probably 10 years. And, the collapse of public markets, the stock market versus the private markets, that's another huge phenomenon. I'm not sure it's very good for, it's certainly not good for the City of London.
Yeah.
But I would be looking there, private markets, private wealth.
Is there one thing that you would do to improve the competitiveness of the City of London? I mean, I know there's a lot of challenges the stock exchange is facing, and it's a myriad of problems. It's not just a single one. But is there anything that you would particularly recommend to the new government?
Well, I wouldn't be taking look, I'm not an expert on listings requirements. I probably wasn't even much of one when I was editor. But if you think we're talking about Arm, it didn't list in London. Our best companies sold, and guess what happens? It lists on NASDAQ. I think that I wouldn't be taking a higher, mightier than thou attitude to founders' shares or things like that with tech companies. I'd be saying we want them.
Yeah.
And I would also try to, revitalize the USA, the unlisted securities market, the junior market AIM and things like that. I think, of course, there'll be times when it goes wrong. And then people can say, well, do we need these Kazakh mining companies in the FTSE? Well, where else are they going to go? I mean, I think London's always been open. It's not Londonograd. It's an entrepot. So we need to be open and welcoming to people to put their money here.
This may well also be a hard question to answer, but if you could relive one day as editor, which one would you choose?
Oh, I never look back over things, and there are some real highlights. So, exposing Wirecard, which was the biggest fraud
incredible.
since Enron, and it was an amazing story. So I look at that. That's what I'm going to. If I probably the one thing I'd change.
The book by Dan McCormick.
Yeah, Money Minute's a great book. It's a great story. We stood up against everybody on that, including the full weight of the German establishment, the financial establishment, the regulators, the politicians, the lawyers in the City of London that were threatening us. We spent several £100,000 on legal fees to stop people, to defend ourselves against wrong charges. So these are big moments. We did big investigations. We got a lot right. But the one day, I'm not sure it's a day actually, it's a few days that I would relive and say we should have done a better job, was just covering Brexit outside London and getting a much better sense of this public opinion in the country, and not looking at it through the Brexit question through a purely rational economic lens, and also not looking at Brexit simply through the lies that were told in order to get the right vote. And then they were lies about Turkey joining the EU and all the rest of it. But in a sense, that wasn't the point. The point was public opinion was moving against staying in the UK, and I at the FT didn't pick it up properly. I mean, at least I got Trump right. I did think Trump was going to win, but we got Brexit as a general. We didn't get that right. We didn't do a good enough job of reporting what was going on outside London, and I take a responsibility for that. And we corrected it afterwards to a lot of good stuff, but it wasn't good enough.
And who else do you think holds responsibility for the Brexit vote? I mean, it's interesting in the book, like
David Cameron, 2 words.
But you also talk about Rupert Murdoch. I thought was very interesting, and just like always wanting to poke the establishment, and just the EU being seen as part of that. I thought was interesting.
I remember going to see Rupert Murdoch in 2003, before the United Nations Security Council failed to give backing for the US-led attack on Iraq, Gulf War II. And I remember going to see him, and his first question was, well, what are we going to do about France and Germany? And I said, what do you mean? I mean, and he said, the Iraq War, they're against America, and they're against Britain. So what are we going to do? And I said, well, we need to be a bit careful. I mean, they're allies. And he interrupted. He said, no, I mean, how are we going to punish them? I mean, we should be withdrawing American troops from the German garrisons. I mean, this is outrageous. And I thought, oh my God, I mean, this guy really is, he's committed to the war, but he's also committed to the transatlantic alliance. And he sees Britain as almost outside Europe. And that the litmus test was Iraq. Well, we know what happened in Iraq. It was a disaster because, well, we know.
Yeah.
So I don't need to go there. But Rupert Murdoch was pro-Brexit because he was anti-establishment, because he thought that Britain could thrive outside Europe. He didn't have any understanding or feel for Brussels or the fact that we were aligned in a regulatory sense with Brussels. We were in the single market. We were the landing spot for the aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
All this, we had huge benefits for being in the single market but not in the single currency. And John Major actually very cleverly negotiated that in the Maastricht Treaty in 1992. So, unfortunately, I mean, Murdoch and Daily Mail, it was naive of David Cameron to think that he could get these newspapers on side. No way was he going to do that.
Yeah.
And therefore we lost out. We did lose out.
It's very interesting. You were sort of tweeting over the weekend about the kind of like makeup of the Downing Street operation. And as somebody who's been sort of like involved with lots of different Downing Street operations and directors of communications, how do you think that role has kind of evolved? And what do you think of the kind of modern day government communication apparatus?
Well, you know more about this than I do, and I mean, I've been out of it for 5 years. But first of all, I did tweet a little bit about this because I think it's worth stating first that certain sections of the press, Daily Telegraph particularly, Daily Mail, they've been out to get Starmer and Sue Gray, his chief of staff, from day one. And I don't think it's particularly healthy to try and tear down a prime minister who enjoys a pretty serious mandate, and he's trying to come in after 14 years outside government. He brought in Sue Gray because she was experienced in matters of Whitehall, and to get into a froth about, I mean, got hammered in the Times, I got criticised in the Times by a gentleman called Will Lloyd, who I don't often read, but anyway, he thinks that, well, £170,000, it's a lot of money. Well, it's not actually a lot of money versus the respective pay of other senior officials. Now, she's a political appointee, but she's doing a really important job. So that's the first point. The second is that I think that his operation is somewhat underpowered. And you can't have a sick, and he is sick, so Simon Case is. It's tragic that he's not that old, he's in his 40s, and he's got something wrong, but he clearly can't do the job. And they should have just said, we're going to sort that out straight away, and been ruthless about it. It's not being unfair, because if he's not full... Well, I think that the Downing Street operation, and again, I'm at a slight distance, is a bit underpowered. The cabinet secretary is not well, so Simon Case. He's very much ancien regime. They should have made a change. They should have got that sorted out. And it seems at least that there is a bit of a power struggle between McSweeney on the political side and Sue Gray. And that's where the Prime Minister has to step in and say, we've been outside government for 14 years. Excuse me, sort this out. I mean, just crack heads. But then...
It is slightly odd that she's just paid £3,000 more. I mean, it seems such a sort of trifling amount.
But it's all about optics. I don't care about the optics. But they're making a huge thing about it, that she's paid £3,000 more than Keir Starmer. Will pay Starmer £5,000 or something more. I mean, it's a nonsense given... Again, I don't want to sound too sanctimonious about this, but when you look at what is happening in the outside world and the dangerous place we're in, where Ukraine could fold. You have an American presidential election. It's the most consequential in decades, maybe since '68 or whatever. Trump could come back. That's massive for the alliance, what he's going to do. You've got US, China, and then the Middle East is red hot. And Iran on the brink of a nuclear weapon. I mean, and we're talking about £3,000 difference. I mean, it's ludicrous. I mean, we need a Britain that's actually working and a government that has authority. We've already got the French and the Germans on their backsides. The two strongest governments in Europe right now are in Italy and Greece.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
You wouldn't predicted that, would you? Wait, did you think Trump will win again? Called it last time?
I'm not calling it now. I think it's too close to call. He's got a big advantage. I think he's still got an advantage on the economy because Kamala Harris has not really defined what she would do. People remember the good times under Trump. Stock market went up a lot, sort of 20% or something. And the inflation is a problem. And people are really hurting on the, car insurance, all this. So the Democrats are vulnerable there. On the other hand, people just may have had enough of Trump. In the cycle, the political cycle which we have, where people just say, actually, it's time for something different.
Yeah.
We know that tune, we don't like it. But in times of uncertainty, do we go the strong man? I mean, I worry if he does come back, because he's going to be very overconfident.
Yeah.
He's definitely out to get the deep state.
Yeah.
Go after the CIA. I mean, it's going to be, it'd be very rough. So what we have to hope is, if he did win, then either the House or Senate goes Democrat.
Interesting. Which, you said you've been to Silicon Valley a lot. Obviously, you've been seeing business leaders there. Who sort of impresses you out there?
Satya Nadella at Microsoft is incredibly impressive.
Why?
Just because if you think of what he's done to that company and the value that he's created after Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer, I mean, he's built up the games with Activision. He's got into AI, ChatGPT. He's really built the cloud business. I mean, he's just got it. And if you think of these other companies that have gone through their Kodak moments, where either they got fixated, like IBM, on the PC, they missed the cloud, or they missed mobile. Satya Nadella is really, really good. And I think Sundar Pichai has done a pretty good job, difficult job. They've got a Bolshi, fairly independent binding workforce there. I mean, that's been tricky. And in a way, although I'm not particularly, he's a little cold as a person to talk to. But you have to give Mark Zuckerberg some credit for, pivoting out of that, digital currency, and then sort of trimming on virtual reality and deep into AI, and the company's stock's gone up, and I think there's a lot of stuff going on in Silicon Valley, which is impressive. Palantir, Alex Karp, very well worth looking at.
You're coming into the final sort of 10 years of your career. What are your ambitions for?
I thought I was going to have another 20 years.
Well, you may well do, but I'm intrigued by it, because when you started out, people weren't working into their 70s necessarily, and actually you will be.
Yeah.
I've got no doubt about that. What are you going to be focusing on?
I'm doing some mentoring, trying to put something back. I'm doing some consulting in America, and I might write another book, but this has been Everest climbing for me to do this book on Masayoshi Son. It really required a lot of work, a lot of hard writing, rewriting, and I sort of almost wrecked my back sitting too long in what my wife calls the cave, this room or this place in the countryside where I sit and sweated. So, I do the Media Confidential podcast with Alan Rusbridger. I'm not looking to break my back, but I want to keep active.
Yeah.
So I may not be working at the same pace. The last 3 years doing this book, I think I was traveling as much as I did as editor of the FT, and it can get pretty exhausting if you're going through these various time zones.
At the start of your book, you said that of your autobiography, that you weren't going to move much from London for the first few years, and then actually by the end of it, you are travelling a huge amount. Do you think somebody who has taken on a similar job would see London as central as you did in the mid-2000s?
No, it wasn't. That wasn't the reason, actually, that I said that. I just took a vow of abstinence for the first year.
Right. Okay.
Because when I took over at the FT, frankly, the place was a bit of a mess. We'd lost direction, they'd lost money, and I needed to change the top team, build my team, work with the commercial side to completely transform the business model, and just starting to, trot around the world would have sent the wrong signal.
Okay.
Also, my family was in New York, so I knew I was going to have to go to New York to see them for the first 8 months. So I just didn't go anywhere until I went to India for 2 weeks after 1 year. And then I said, I would travel at least once a year for 2 weeks somewhere interesting where I would see the foreign correspondents. And I did travel around the world, went to a lot of places, interviewed a lot of leaders. And then gradually, as the things settled down, I did a little bit more traveling because we were a global news organization.
Yeah, and you got past 1 million digital subscribers, which is pretty amazing. Final 2 questions. I'll let you take them in the order that you want. What's your advice to younger journalists? You obviously do a lot of mentoring. And finally, what was it like interviewing Vladimir Putin, and how did you prepare for it?
The advice I would give to young journalists is don't be cynical, be curious. Mm-hmm. Don't interview people by email. Mm-hmm. Go and see them in person, smell the horse flesh. And then third, develop one area that's your own. You have a patch. Because you don't want to be a generalist. And maybe fourth, understand it's multimedia. So you may have only a great face for radio, but you're going to have to go on screen. You're going to have to film, you're going to have to dictate audio and write. And you need to master all these skills. And if you can actually code as well, even better. So that's the future of journalism. Preparing for Putin, well, first of all, I phoned 2 people that I knew were incredibly smart and had a view of Putin. One was Bob Zoellick, who was the president of the World Bank, worked for Baker. I'd known him since the late 80s, and I knew he would have interesting ideas. And then I called Bill Burns, who's now the director of the CIA. He'd been Deputy Secretary of State, and he'd been ambassador in Moscow, so he'd had hours with Putin. And I asked them, what's the best way of dealing with Putin, particularly at the beginning? Because I don't want to make a mistake. And they said, treat him with respect. Don't treat him as the bad boy because you won't get anything. Mm-hmm. So that's why I was very polite. I wasn't obsequious, but I was certainly respectful. And I just saved my own dignity by speaking to him in German to remind him that he was a secret agent for the KGB in Dresden. And he replied to me in German. So that was a way of just sending a couple of signals. And then I did go over the subjects about the areas where we were going to talk in my mind. And I had then, lastly, I prepared 2 killer questions that I knew would elicit a response. And the first was Bill Burns gave it to me because I said, well, if you had the chance to sit down with him, what would you do? And I said, what would the question be? And he said, ask him after 20 years whether his risk appetite has gone up or down. And of course, he didn't answer the question, and then he did. And he said, I would like to quote the Russian proverb, those who don't take the risk don't get to drink the champagne. And at that point I thought, he's going to do something.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a real giveaway. And the other question was actually given me by my younger brother, who's a Russian expert. And this really provoked Putin gave me the front page story, and the big interview piece, which was when I said to him, well, we've had populist movements in America, Spain, Germany, France, Italy. When's it coming to Russia? And he was so irritated that he said, you have to understand the liberal idea is obsolete. You Western democracies are absolutely decadent. You've lost control. The most important thing for a government and a leader is to keep in sync with the population. And in the West, you've lost that. And liberalism, the liberal idea is obsolete. That's what he said. And that was our headline.
Yeah. And do you think he got a point on that? Do you think political leaders have...
Well, on the face of it, there's some truth in it. But also, what does he know about what the real Russian public... I mean, the idea he cares about public opinion in Russia. I mean, he's a dictator. Yeah. And he's ruthless. So this was about propagating the notion of Western decline, sowing doubt and self-doubt. And he's brilliant at that. He's a master propagandist.
And when you're preparing for an interview, like, what are you trying to sort of? You're not particularly looking for like a news line necessarily, right? Like it's bigger than that. Like,
much bigger.
What do you sort of?
To get an essence of the character, what they believe in, what they're like, their aura, to give the reader a sense of who is this person and what are they going to do, and they're really important. That's the point. And out of that, then if you look at what they're saying, probably some kind of news line will emerge. But you should never go in. I mean, this is one of the problems that journalists do, is when they're interviewing people on the radio in real time, they're constantly trying to bait them into giving a news line, but they're not eliciting information or insights. So when I interview people, I always try and get them to be relaxed and get them to say things that they're not quite aware that they are going to say. And of course, the master at that was David Frost.
Yeah, no, quite. Who did you enjoy interviewing the most? And I just on that news line thing, I think a lot of it is driven by journalists and internal status within journalist bubbles, because it's other people then following the news line. And actually, I find it sort of, there's a lot of problems with the gotcha questions, etc. But it ends up sort of, it's an internal status play in the world of journalism, I think.
Not in my book.
Not in your book, no, but you're slightly...
I mean,
who did you enjoy interviewing the most?
Yeah, I know what you mean about the status thing, but it's not. It's just... The Putin interview was definitely a highlight, because you came out and you thought, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And here it is. We finished at about 1:25. The interview started at 11:50. And you just had a sense of, oh my God, we got a great story, we got great colour, we got everything. So I had to do something to camera in the rain in Red Square, then going back to the hotel and forcing my colleague to say, right, we're going to write the first, what are the 10 most important things of this interview, and then begin to understand how to begin the piece. So then 3 hours later, starting to write, we knew we weren't driving in fog. So that was very, very professionally rewarding. But I think the other interview that I did was with Paul Kagame in Rwanda, which was 3.5 hours. I was sitting on a sofa. Back was killing me. My wife was there in the background. And we're just talking to him about, a civil war where 500,000 people were killed in a genocide in a matter of weeks. And then rebuilding the country, and how he did it, and was he going to retire at some point? What about succession? And dealing, creating a new nation. That was interesting. There are a lot of interesting interviews, but yeah.
It's interesting. It's
been lucky.
Well, Lionel, thank you very much for coming on Jimmy's Jobs of the Future.
Thank you, Jim. That's great. Lots of fun. Thanks.